It's believed that no one during the Second World War, or before, dared to even question Adolf Hitler about anything. Many people were incredibly fearful of Hitler, and even his closest friends and advisors would incur his wrath at times, as he would fly into an immense fury and rage. Hitler famously is depicted in the final days of the Second World War, going crazy inside of his bunker, as he would admit that the war was lost during the Battle of Berlin. It was after this that the dictator got his affairs in order, and arrangements for his death were debated. But there was one woman who was a wife of a lower-ranking member of Hitler's government that did at one point dare to challenge and go up against Hitler with regards to the brutality and destruction of the Holocaust and his policies on the concentration camps. Henriette von Schirach, or Henny von Schirach, as she was also known, was the wife of Baldur von Schirach, the former Hitler Youth leader, or the Reich Youth leader. But her story and encounter with Hitler deserves to be known, as she was one of a very few number of people who ever dared to challenge Hitler on the most horrific parts of his dictatorship. Join us today as we look at the wife of the Hitler Youth leader that challenged Hitler on the Holocaust. And as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Henriette Hoffmann, as she was born, was the eldest child of a man who would become Adolf Hitler's personal photographer. Her father was a man who played an important role in Hitler's rise to power, as he would distribute and take photographs of the dictator, which were used in propaganda, and these images were then distributed, and from the use of propaganda emerged the cult of Hitler. He would receive royalties from the use of Hitler's image, and Heinrich Hoffmann became a millionaire because of this. Henriette's mother was a former singer and actress, and she spent her childhood inside a very staunch pro-Nazi household, and her father was a prominent nationalist and a very early member of the Nazi Party. At the age of 9, she would meet Hitler for the very first time, and he would regularly visit the Hoffmann home as a guest for dinner. But what is also rather troubling is the account that Hitler may have made a romantic gesture towards Henny when she was just 17, and of course Hitler was 24 years older than her, meaning when this happened he was in his 40s. It was said of the incident that he gave himself great airs with his dark leather coat, his whip and his Mercedes, whose driver waited for him in the front of the door. After dinner, Hitler, at that time he was still Herr Hitler to us, sat down at the piano and played some Wagner, followed by some Verdi. Do you recognise the leitmotif of La Forza del Destino? He addressed me as Du, for I was only 17 and he was over 40. Finally, to my great surprise, he asked me with a very serious air, "Will you kiss me?" I was chiefly struck by the fact that he had said "si" to me this time, the first time in our acquaintance. Yet, as he put his face down to mine, I said no. He turned round and went out, closing the door behind him. When my father returned to the house, I told him of the incident. He laughed in my face and declared, "You're imagining things, you silly goose." Being the daughter of a prominent friend of Hitler, it was likely that Henriette would marry a man who was important inside of the Nazi Party. It was almost like dukes, earls and kings and queens of the medieval period and later, marrying off daughters to influential and more important men to secure power, influence and alliances. This is what happened with Henny, as she would in 1931 meet Baldur von Schirach for the first time, who was the youngest member of Hitler's entourage and close inner circle. After a short period of dating, the couple married in March 1932, and the witnesses were no other than Hitler himself and the head of the SA, the Brown Shirts, Ernst Röhm. The wedding reception also took place inside of Hitler's own personal apartments. Over the next 10 years, she would give birth to 4 children. However, in June 1933, her husband was made the leader of the Hitler Youth. Baldur von Schirach's aim was to re-educate the German youth in the Nazi ways and policies, and it was said of him that he would do anything it took to force through his plans. He later joined the German army and won the Iron Cross in France, before Hitler appointed him the Gauleiter of Vienna. This showed how Hitler viewed Baldur's role inside of the Third Reich, and he was said to have been incredibly loyal to the dictator. Baldur von Schirach would also be involved in the deportations of Jews to Poland, which resulted in many being sent to their deaths inside of the concentration camps, and in July 1942 he would make a speech defending the deportations of thousands to the ghettos. But despite her husband's work and loyalty to Hitler, Henny would make a stand against the deportations of the Jews and their punishment. In 1943, she witnessed a group of Jewish women being deported from Amsterdam, and an SS soldier offered to sell her the valuables he had taken from them. She was shocked at this inhumane treatment, and she thought that as she had known Hitler for a very long time, and that she had a good relationship with him, that he would listen to her. During a visit to the Berghof on the 24th of June 1943, Henriette von Schirach dared to raise the issue of the Holocaust and the treatment of Jews with Hitler, and following this Hitler flew into an almighty rage and screamed, "That's all I need, you coming to me with this sentimental twaddle. What concern are these Jewish women to you?" Following this, she left the Berghof and was never invited again to Hitler's mountain retreat. There were many other accounts of this meeting and incident, as in her memoir in 1975, she wrote that Hitler said, "You're sentimental. What have the Jews in Holland got to do with you? It's all sentimentality, humanity claptrap. You have to learn to hate." But the incident would even have been referred to at the Nuremberg trials, and it may have helped her husband actually escape the hangman's noose, as he would also present further evidence that he tried to challenge Hitler on his policies. Baldur von Schirach stated at the Nuremberg trials that the silence was icy, and after a short time Hitler merely said, "This is pure sentimentality." That was all. No further conversation took place that evening. Hitler retired earlier than usual. He would also say that he and his wife had planned to confront Hitler over 3 evenings, with Henny protesting in the first few nights of their visit and stay. It's not entirely established how involved in the protests that Baldur von Schirach was, and he may have played up his involvement in this during the Nuremberg trials to help save him from the hangman's noose. But it was said that earlier that day Baldur had claimed that the war needed to be stopped, and Hitler said, "He knows as well as I do there is no way out. I might as well shoot myself in the head than think of negotiating peace," and Hitler would then cut off Schirach. Later, Henny would also recollect the incident again, and she said, "So I told him what I'd seen. His reply was, 'You are sentimental.' Then there was a terrible row. He stood up, I stood up. I said, 'Herr Hitler, you ought not to be doing that.' I thought I could allow myself to say such a thing, because I'd known him for so long. I've hurt him deeply, what's more in front of other men who were there." Then Hitler said, "Every day 10,000 of my best soldiers die on the battlefield, while the others carry on living in the camps. That means the biological balance in Europe is not right anymore." Henny would also later state that German officers had even told her to raise the conversation with Hitler, as she claimed, "The German officers there said to me, 'When you see Hitler, tell him what he is doing in Holland is crazy. We've made enemies of the Dutch. We're behaving badly, locking people up.' I was horrified. I hadn't known. I said, 'I've seen that we're doing terrible things and that soldiers are ashamed, and we're.' Then there was a terrible quarrel. Even Traudl Junge, Hitler's personal secretary, one of the final women of the Führerbunker, would note this incident, and Joseph Goebbels would also write about it in his diary. At the end of the Second World War, Baldur von Schirach tried to evade capture, and he would later surrender to the Americans. He was convicted at the Nuremberg trials for his involvement in the deportations of Jews of Vienna, but for this he was not sentenced to death. Henny would find herself arrested and held inside a women's camp, but she was released and arrested again, and went through the different denazification categories. When in prison, she was given a job of cleaning toilets of the prison with Hitler Youth flags, and she claimed she was mistreated by American guards. But whilst her husband was in prison after her release, she decided to divorce her husband, as she wrote, "You isolated yourself from everything and everyone, your head forever in the clouds, as it almost always has been from the day of our marriage. As the years went by, I realised more than ever that your idealistic obsessions and dreams were taking you further from me and the children. I was ready to face death with you. Your answer to me was, 'I cannot take my life. First I must make my place and my work clear before history.' As always, you would not face facts. Had I taken poison, it would have saved me untold suffering in my fight to live and keep my children alive. I have expressed my feelings so many times before you, but you have always preferred to ignore them as being distasteful. Reality has always been distasteful for you." Henriette von Schirach's involvement in the Second World War was a rather strange one. She was the wife of a high-ranking Nazi whose work would lead to the slaughter of people, and this man was convicted of crimes against humanity at the most high-profile war crimes trial. But she is remembered in history as a woman who was one of very few who ever dared to challenge Hitler about his treatment of the Jews and the persecution they were suffering, and with this she dared to challenge Hitler on the Holocaust. She was a very brave woman who stood up for people who were suffering, and the stand she took against Hitler was a very, very shocking one. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.